Have you ever felt like online, you're kind of stuck in someone else's world? Like you're just kind of wandering around this giant digital shopping mall and you don't really have a say in how things are run or what shops are there. Well, today we're diving deep into something that could be a real game changer, Web4, and how it could actually give us the power to build our own online communities, places that are actually tailored to what we need and what we believe in.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how much the web has already changed, right? I mean, think about it. We went from those like static Web 1 pages, remember those?
Oh, yeah.
To the interactive but like super centralized Web 2.
Right.
And then the whole decentralization push of Web 3.
Yeah.
But Web 4, that's taking it to a whole other level. It's not just about decentralization. It's about us becoming co-creators, not just users.
Okay, so we're not talking about just like another tech upgrade here. This is about like shifting who's in control, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Our source, Web 4. Decentralized community building and the future of social networks. It makes the case that Web 4 is all about dismantling the traditional gatekeepers of the internet. Imagine a future where communities aren't just stuck following the rules of these massive platforms. They can create spaces that actually reflect who they are, their own unique identity.
So less like a giant, generic shopping mall.
Yeah.
And more like a city with all these different, vibrant, independent neighborhoods. I like that. I like that analogy.
That's it. And one of the things about Web 4 that I find really exciting is how it's making it possible for companies to build their own social networks, ones that are, specifically designed for their target audiences.
Wait, hold on. Companies making their own social networks. Doesn't that seem kind of counterintuitive? I thought Web 4 was all about like breaking free from corporate control.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it might seem a little strange at first, but think about it this way. Right now, companies have to try to engage with their audiences on platforms that they have zero control over.
Right.
They're at the mercy of these algorithms and data policies that can change on a dime. But Web 4 flips the script. It lets companies create their own spaces where they can actually connect with their customers on their own terms.
Okay, so it's not about companies like trying to control people. It's more about giving them the tools to build real communities around their brands.
Precisely. Think about a company like Patagonia, right? They're known for loving the outdoors and sustainability. Imagine them building a social network just for outdoor enthusiasts with features specifically for their needs.
Oh, wow.
You could have forums for sharing trail maps, organizing group hikes, talking about eco-friendly gear, all within an ecosystem that people actually trust.
Yeah, I'd join that network. But wouldn't it be super complicated for a company to build something like that?
That's where platforms like Linksbreed come in. They provide the infrastructure and the tools that companies need to build these Web 4 networks. They take care of all the technical stuff so businesses can just focus on creating great experiences for their communities.
So Linksbreed is like the architect, kind of, providing the blueprints for these new online neighborhoods. What are they focusing on?
They emphasize three main things: customization, so you can create your own digital identity; enhanced user engagement, and this is big, data control.
Data control. Yeah, that's huge. We've all seen how these big platforms collect and use our data. How does Web 4 change that?
Well, the idea is to give control back to the users. In a Web 4 community, it's your data, it's your activity, and you should have a say in how it's used. Instead of these shady algorithms, Web 4 is about transparency, letting communities decide together how their data is managed and governed.
That's a big deal, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around like what that actually looks like. Can you give me a real world example?
Sure. Imagine a community, let's say it's built around a local bookstore.
Oh, yeah.
In a Web 4 model, that community could collectively own its data. They can decide what information gets shared, how it's used, who can see it. They could even choose to monetize that data together and share the profits among the community members.
Wow, that's a revolution I could get behind. But beyond data control, what are some of the other ways that Web 4 is changing how we build and experience online communities?
One of the biggest shifts is the focus on collaboration. On regular social media, we're mostly just passive consumers of content. Web 4 flips that around. It encourages people to participate and create things together.
So less scrolling through endless feeds and more actually working together to build something.
That's it. And because these networks are designed with specific audiences in mind, people are much more engaged and more likely to collaborate. Imagine, like, a community of musicians using a Web 4 platform to work on songs together, give each other feedback, even share ownership of the rights to their music. That's a whole new level of creativity.
Yeah, that's amazing. But wouldn't this lead to a ton of tiny, isolated communities? Right. Would we lose that sense of, being connected to the wider internet.
That's a common concern, but the cool thing about Web4 is that these communities aren't silos. They can be linked together, but in a decentralized, more organic way. Imagine a network of interconnected communities, each with its own focus, but able to share information and work together across those boundaries.
Okay, so it's not about replacing the entire internet. It's more about creating a more diverse and interconnected system of communities.
Exactly. And that diversity is really exciting. It means we can have a much richer, more nuanced online experience where people can find their tribe and participate in communities that really align with their interests and values.
Wow, this is blowing my mind. We've gone from static pages to this vision of interconnected communities where users actually have power. It feels like we're on the verge of a massive shift in how we think about the internet.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Web4 so fascinating. It's not just about new technology. It's about changing the power dynamics of the online world, giving individuals and communities the ability to shape their own digital destinies.
Okay, we need to pause here for a second and let all this sink in. This is a lot to process, but in a good way. We've covered a lot, but we're just getting started.
Yeah, it's a huge shift, right? Like we're so used to the internet being controlled by just a few big companies, but Web4 is like a glimpse into a future where things are a lot more democratic, a lot more decentralized.
You keep using that word democratic, and I'm curious, like, what does empowered governance actually look like in a Web4 community? Are we talking about like voting on every little change?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, the specifics are going to be different for each community, right?
Okay.
But the main idea is transparency and getting users involved. So instead of some corporation making decisions behind closed doors, Web4 communities can use things like blockchain technology, to create these transparent voting systems where members actually have a direct say in how the community grows and evolves.
So like, imagine a Web4 community for, I don't know, independent filmmakers. Members could vote on which projects get funding, propose new features for the platform, even decide how the community's resources are used. It's like a digital co-op, kind of.
Exactly. And that feeling of ownership is what makes these Web4 communities so powerful. It's not just about passively consuming content. It's about actively shaping the direction of the community and contributing to its success.
It all sounds like really empowering, but let's be real for a second. There have to be some challenges with Web4, right? I mean, it can't all be smooth sailing.
Of course there are. There are definitely hurdles. I'd say one of the biggest is adoption. People are creatures of habit. It takes time for people to shift away from the platforms they're familiar with, even if those platforms aren't really serving them well.
It's like we're all stuck in this digital rut. Like, we know there might be better options out there, but it just feels easier to stick with what we know, even if it's frustrating.
Yeah, totally. And that's why education is so important. We need to help people understand, like, what Web4 can actually do, how it can empower them to create a better online experience for themselves.
So it's not just about building the technology, it's about getting people excited about this new vision for the internet, right?
Exactly. And it's also about addressing some of the concerns that people have, which are totally valid. One of the big ones is security. When you're dealing with decentralized networks, security gets even more complicated.
That's a good point. Like, in a traditional system, you have one company responsible for keeping things safe. But in a decentralized world, who's in charge of security?
Right. It's a crucial question, and Web4 developers are working on it. The good news is that decentralized systems can actually be more secure than centralized ones because they don't have a single point of failure.
Oh, okay. So instead of having all your eggs in one basket, you're spreading them out, which makes it way harder for hackers to take down the whole system.
That's the idea. And there are some really innovative approaches being developed, like distributed ledger technology and advanced encryption, which are specifically designed to improve security in a decentralized environment.
That's good to hear. But security isn't the only thing, right? There's also moderation. Like, how do you stop Web4 communities from becoming echo chambers or breeding grounds for misinformation and, just toxic behavior?
That is another big challenge for sure. And it requires a multifaceted approach. Web4 communities need to be designed with strong governance models that give users the ability to set standards, moderate content, and just create a healthy online environment.
So it's not just about letting anyone say whatever they want. It's about creating accountability and making sure communities have clear rules and ways to deal with harmful content.
You got it. And this is where the human element comes in. We need to build a culture of responsibility in these Web4 communities, where people understand that they have a part to play in creating a positive online environment.
Like that old saying, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
We're talking about giving people and communities more power than ever, so it's crucial that they use it wisely and thoughtfully.
Yeah, well said. And that leads us to another really important aspect of Web4, inclusivity. We need to make sure these new online spaces are welcoming and accessible to everyone, no matter their background, their beliefs, or their technical skills.
That's so important. We don't want to just recreate the same inequalities and divisions that we see offline, right? So how do we make sure these Web4 communities are truly inclusive?
Well, it starts with the design. We need to build platforms that are easy to use and understand so anyone can participate. And we need to make accessibility a priority, to make it easier for people with disabilities to use these online spaces.
And it's not just about the technical stuff. It's about the culture too, right? Like, how do we create that sense of belonging in Web4 communities?
It's about encouraging open dialogue, respecting different perspectives, and having ways to address bias and discrimination. We need to be intentional about building communities where everyone feels valued and respected.
I mean, that's where the real work is, isn't it? It's not enough to just build the technology. You have to build the culture too.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Web4 so exciting. It's not just a technological revolution, it's a social and cultural one too. It's a chance to really reimagine how we connect, collaborate, and build community in the digital age.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. But before we get too carried away, let's zoom out a bit and think about the big picture. Like, how do you see Web4 impacting the internet as a whole in the next few years?
I think Web4 has the power to completely change the internet as we know it. Instead of just a few giant platforms controlling everything, I see a future where there's a much more diverse and vibrant ecosystem of interconnected communities, each with its own unique focus and identity.
So instead of everyone being on Facebook or Instagram, we'll have all these specialized networks for different interests, passions, communities.
Exactly. It's like the difference between a monoculture and a rainforest. A monoculture is efficient, but it's also fragile. But a rainforest is full of diversity, which makes it stronger and more adaptable.
I love that analogy. It really captures what Web4 is all about. But with all this talk about different communities and diversity, doesn't that make you worry about echo chambers? Like, won't people just end up interacting only with people who already agree with them?
That's a valid concern, definitely. But I also think Web4 can help bridge those divides.
How so? I mean, wouldn't smaller, more niche communities naturally lead to people just reinforcing their own biases?
It's a risk, but Web4 can also create more connections between these communities. Imagine a platform where people can easily move between different communities, share ideas, and collaborate on projects across those boundaries.
So instead of being stuck in these filter bubbles, we could have a much more fluid and dynamic online experience where we're constantly encountering new perspectives and ideas.
Exactly. And that exchange of ideas is super important for a healthy and vibrant online ecosystem.
Okay, my head is spinning with all these possibilities. We've talked about how Web4 impacts companies, communities, and individuals. But what about governments and regulators? What role do they play in this decentralized world?
That's a tricky one, and there's still a lot of debate about it. Some people think governments should stay out of it and let Web4 develop naturally. Others think some regulation is needed to protect users and make sure the online environment is fair and equitable.
So it's a balancing act between encouraging innovation and protecting the public interest.
Absolutely. And finding that balance is going to be super important for the long-term success of Web4.
Wow, we have covered so much today. We've talked about the potential benefits, the challenges, and just all the exciting possibilities Web4 holds for the future of the internet. But before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about Web4 being more than just a technological shift. It's a social and cultural shift, too.
Yeah, for sure. It's about shifting the power dynamics of the internet and giving individuals and communities more control over their digital lives. It's about creating a more democratic, inclusive, and participatory online experience.
And that feels really significant, like we're at the beginning of a truly transformative moment in the history of the internet.
I totally agree. We're standing at the edge of something brand new, and it's up to all of us to shape what that future looks like.
All right, folks, I think we need to take a moment to let all of this sink in. We've only just begun to explore this topic, but I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you a little taste of what Web4 is all about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing when you think about it. We went from those early static pages to this idea of these like interconnected communities where users actually have a real voice. Web4 is like a whole new chapter in how the internet is evolving.
It really is, and it's one that puts the power back into the hands of the people using it, which is something we haven't really seen before on this scale. It's exciting, but I think it's a little daunting too, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. It's like we're standing on the edge of this huge uncharted territory, right?
Yes.
Like we can see the potential, but we're still figuring out how to navigate it. And that actually brings us to our final thought for this deep dive.
I mean, we've talked about what Web4 is and what it could be, but the big question, the question everyone needs to ask themselves is this. What kind of online community would you create if you had the power? What what are the things that you need that the current platforms just aren't giving you? What are you passionate about that you want to share and build with other people?
That is such a powerful question to think about. It's easy to get lost in all the technical details, but at the end of the day, Web4 is about giving people the tools to create the kind of online spaces they actually want to be a part of.
Exactly. So take some time to really think about that, maybe even jot down some ideas. Because who knows, you might be the one to build the next great online community.
This really does feel like the beginning of something new, doesn't it? Like an era where the internet is less about just consuming content and more about actually connecting with people, collaborating, and creating things together.
That's the hope. So stay curious, explore, and maybe you'll be one of the people shaping the future of the internet. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.